Welcome to the FMCG Guys, the podcast that dives into the innovation, strategy, and trends shaping consumer goods and retail in Europe and beyond.
Welcome to the FMCG Guys podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Torres. If this is the first time you join us, here we speak with top voices in the fast-moving consumer goods and retail industries. You'll find us, as you are probably finding us now, on your favorite podcast player, as well as on our LinkedIn page. If you're not following us there, we recommend you do. You'll join a community of right now 13,700 members and growing. And we're also part of a family of podcasts, which is led by the CPG guys in the US. Tune in there if you want to hear about all the omni-commerce world at the other side of the pond. So in this adventure, which we started as the FMCG guys in January 2022, sounds like ancient times now. I started this adventure with my good friend, Efrain Rosario, who's just landed from Puerto Rico, his homeland. How are you, Efrain?
Good. Daniel, nice to be with you. It's a bit of a change going from sunny skies and beaches to rain and clouds in Paris, but good to be with you.
From the palm trees, you were sending me to the Eiffel Tower, eh?
More or less.
Excellent. Well, somebody else that's joining us from somewhere which is not known precisely for its weather, all the way from the UK, is Neil Reynolds, the Global VP Digital Commerce at Mars. How are you, Neil?
Hey, guys. Great to see you. Yeah, thank you for having me today. Really looking forward to the conversation. It's great to meet you both in person. Heard lots, and I think our paths have crossed in many ways. So I'm talking to you from, it is actually a sunny UK at the moment. We have a glimmer of sun. How long that lasts, who knows? I'm talking to you on my final call on a Friday before I wrap for the week. So what a high and what a way to end the week.
Yeah, I have a bad news for our audience, though. The good conversation that we had about Reading Football Club, it was offline before we started recording. So maybe for another day.
Yeah, that's a secret between us, Daniel, yeah.
Exactly. So Neil, for the audience to get acquainted with you, I think that when we spoke the other day, like to arrange the podcast and so on, we're talking about your career path, and I think it's been quite an interesting one. Could you give us like a quick summary of it?
Yeah, sure. No, happy to. So I guess I start very much from, what were those strands of curiosity I had back when I was at university and studying, and I began actually by studying a degree at the University of Southampton in management sciences and accounting. So take from that two things. First one was I was really curious about the commercial runnings of a business from way back when. And that was something which has always been at the heart of me, I think, as an FMCG leader and in the path I've taken in the roles I've done. And secondly, business models and the way that business models evolved was something which was super curious and super interesting to me from those early days. So I studied for that degree, and then I was lucky enough to join Mars as a graduate. I joined in the sales function, so I began very much carrying the bag.
Carrying the
bag and taking it to pet shops, physically selling to pet shops, selling the great brands like Pedigree, Whiskers, Caesar, Sheba, Kitty Cat. Slightly showing my age, but physically taking orders on transfer order pads, which were paper at that point, and then sending them through to wholesalers. So very much exposing my age there. And then I had a very sort of traditional demand-based career at Mars for about 15 years. I worked through a range of different customer jobs, broader strategic demand jobs like shopper marketing, customer marketing, strategic revenue management, a bit of brand management along the way. And I worked across the pet division, the food division, and the chocolate division at that point. And then after about 15 years, I took the bold decision to leave Mars, actually. And I left Mars and I joined Johnson & Johnson Consumer, or Kenvue, as they're well known now, to lead the UK consumer business. Again, great brands like Listerine, Aveeno, Johnson's Baby. And I ran the UK market there for about 3.5 years. And then I bounced back into Mars. We call it a boomerang, yeah? So I boomeranged out and I boomeranged back in. Obviously kept in contact with old friends, having grown up in a business. And I actually came back to Mars in a very, very different role to design and lead a strategic portfolio reinvention led out of the supply chain team. So I completely switched functions from demand into supply. I had a great couple of years and learned a ton working in the supply chain team. And then from there, I moved into my current role to lead digital commerce globally around about 2 years ago.
Neil, it's fascinating to hear you talk about like that boomerang effect and coming back to Mars. But like you said, coming back into a very, let's say, non-traditional marketing role working in supply chain. I know we've had a couple of guests recently who've helped school Daniel and myself on supply chain. So we'll definitely have to pick your brain more about that offline as well. But I am curious to get your perspective in terms of like what led you to ecom, right? So if you said after having done that stint in supply chain, then you then pivoted once again into an e-commerce role. And what was your rationale or what was your thinking behind that move?
Yeah, I think, and it was well considered actually, Efrain. So I remember when I was considering this role, I was thinking about what I could bring to the role, but also what I'd get from the role. It was very much a two-way conversation. And I think where I got to was my previous roles have all been around driving commercial delivery, driving transformational change, and doing it through the enterprise or every cross-function. And when I thought about it, I mean, that's exactly what my role is now. I need to deliver the commercial delivery and deliver the commercial plan for global digital commerce, a bit like a general manager, a sales VP, a sales head, an account manager would do. So I still have that component, which I love and gives me energy. I have to partner with all of my enterprise functions, which I love. You know, how do I get the supply chain team to drive transformation in the way that I need them to enable us to win in decom? How do I work with our innovation partners to make sure the portfolio that we're developing will enable us to win in decom? So again, this opportunity for enterprise influence. And the final thing I think I've learned about the roles I've done is I love driving change and actually, you know, having an opportunity to lead a transformation which is at the heart of the overall enterprise strategy and vision, and do it in a positive way where whatever I leave behind will be significantly bigger, better and bolder than what I inherited. So I'm very much energized by sort of being at the heart of transformational change.
Yeah, I mean, these strategic roles where you're like driving a transformation agenda, you probably won't admit it, Neil, but you need to be like quite a special person to be able to get people that they're not reporting into you to do what you want them to do, right? It takes a lot of like smart in a lot of different levels to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think the way we think about it, Daniel, is almost like leadership without authority. Yeah, so you could argue that if you are leading a big business with a huge team of people who report directly into you, in some ways it's easier to get them all marching in the same direction to deliver what you need. In these sorts of roles and particularly operating in the global matrix environment, people will only do what we need them to do if they believe in the reason why and they believe in you as a leader. So this ability to lead without authority, collaborate positively and drive positive tension and better outcomes is what I spend my Monday to Friday doing, and working with great people around the globe to drive our agenda forward.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and I imagine like you were saying, Neil, it's like part of it is you're not just influencing, but you're also inspiring people as well. It's like, you know, we often say like with global roles, particularly in a function that's, let's be honest, still relatively new compared to things like supply chain and whatnot, e-com, you have to inspire people to want to follow you as well.
100%. Yeah. And I think you strike on a really nice point there, Efrain, which is you can only really inspire them if you know what your vision is, but if they understand enough of the reality to get behind that vision. So I also think a little bit about my role as trying to translate the transformation we need in digital commerce to all of the different functions so that they can understand the role that they need to play to get us there. And I think, you know, if you think about my journey, and I've come in to lead digital commerce for a multi-billion-dollar business, having never had a digital commerce focused role over the course of the last 20-ish years of my career. So actually, you know, my role here has always worked in decom, also had decom within my teams. But now to be the head of that function means that I can support understanding, engagement, and obviously confidence within the function, the change we need in any function across the whole of the business.
And I think you've done a good job in your career choosing roles that really like made you grow, like getting P&L, getting people management, cross-functional moves. So look, I don't know if it was probably partly conscious, partly it just happened. But I'm sure that at this stage of your career, if you chose e-commerce, it's because you feel like it's pretty strategic within Mars. What is Mars's like vision of e-commerce? Is it more like a bottom funnel, like sales generator type of thing? Is it becoming also an upper funnel proposition?
No, very much full funnel, Daniel. So to answer your question, and you probably noticed from the first 10 minutes or so of our conversation that it's digital commerce for us. It's not e-commerce. I actually have a range of attire to almost rival your FMCG guys' fleece. There, we have some decom. We have some decom fleeces and polo shirts, which we drive forward to exchange. So for us, it's digital commerce. It's not e-commerce, and the reason we actively choose that as the headline is it's more than I'm going to do the quotey thing, a sales thing. Yeah, for us, digital commerce is more than a sales thing. Very much we're driving enterprise change through all of the functions. So when I think about our vision for digital commerce for Miles Wrigley, Miles Snacking, the first thing I'd say is it's the number one growth driver in our 2030 ambition. So absolutely, we've made a bold call and said it is the number one growth driver as part of our long-term strategy. And the vision is all around igniting the online snacking category. And when we sat down, one of the first things I did in my role was to say, well, what is the strategic plan we need to deliver that value growth that we're talking about? We really struck on this ignition of online snacking, because actually you could argue against all of the categories, snacking is not a great experience in any online environment. No one has really cracked it. Yeah. And if I'm honest and humble and think about the progress that we made as an organization, online impulse is a difficult strategic question. And we probably danced around the edges of that for way too long. And as part of me coming into role, we said, we're not going to do that anymore. Actually, we're going to face into this. So we're all around creating and winning online impulse. The way we'll do that is through thinking about how work gets done and having partnerships and strategic partnerships as a key pillar of our transformation. We think about the industry-leading capabilities that we need to drive, both through the functional specialist areas of digital commerce, but also in all the partner functions that I talked about. So what are those industry-leading capabilities? And the final pillar of our strategy is around top talent. So we took the big call to put talent at the top of the house. Too many times you see a strategy and everyone's seen it underneath. You've got the enablers and talent and team and people and cultures there. We flipped it and we've put it at the top as part of our strategy.
Absolutely. And we were talking a little bit about this before we started recording, Neil, in terms of like, how your team is comprised in terms of covering some of those areas that you mentioned in terms of capability building. But I'm curious to also hear a little bit about how you think about working with key customers in this decom space, and how does that fit into your overall team remit?
Yeah, no, great question. I mean, I would say it's a primary focus, and becoming partner of choice, if we use that phrase for a second, is absolutely part of the deliverables and the accountabilities of my team. So we have a whole team actually focus on digital commerce customer partnerships. The role of that team really there's a couple of bits within that. The first one is they will actively manage the global partnerships that we have with our global digital commerce customers. For example, Amazon, for example, some of the emerging players within quick commerce like Uber. So we will have global partnership agreements with those, and we take those really seriously. Yeah? We've invested behind those partnership agreements with people, with resources, with tech, with media, and we're really driving it forward. So there's part there of driving the global partnerships, but the other the other part of the customer team is really around building the capabilities of our teams in regions and markets to enable them to win with excellence in those markets. So what does a best-in-class omni-channel JBP look like? We're currently rolling out a program to help build capabilities in the markets. It's very different, of course, to how it was 10 years ago, even 5 years ago. And we're talking about how can we have in-store, online, media, and data as equal parts of that conversation, and trying to have 4 equal shares of voice within it. So that team are very much around driving the future, and then partnering with the capabilities to make sure as we're building out, for example, our retail media capabilities, we're doing it in partnership with the critically selected partners that we've chosen to invest behind. So customer partnerships is a huge chunk of my team's focus and agenda.
So interesting, because it reminds me of the way that, for example, like retail, like direct, like retail, like stores, companies work like, where they have local market execution, but then they need to have like a centralized commerce to like really deploy into the different markets. So it's if we'd have this conversation 5 years ago, like this structure would not exist, right? In such a clear way. And like the way that you're like for example, it's as silly as like the fact that you're driving food aggregators centrally and then all the other capabilities are in markets, right? Like I think that we can understand why it's like that, but it's interesting how it's just come to be, you know?
Yeah, and the things we work on, Daniel, genuinely are, if I was to look at the things that I've spent my time on in my team's calls today, they've probably been a combination of, you know, some top-down centrally driven initiatives, which of course we want to drive to build transformation capabilities at scale. We don't want to have 4 separate retail media operating systems for our 4 regions. Of course we don't.
Yeah.
So some of those, but we have a significant number of, call it initiatives, which get scaled from ground up as well. So, you know, I personally and all of my team spend a huge chunk of our time with the digital commerce and the broader demand associates within each of the markets and regions, because let's be honest, that's where the money's made. And in the center, our job is to help them make more money more quickly. So that's the way we think about it.
Yeah. We'll talk about that more.
Yeah, I was going to ask. So, you know, as somebody who sits in a global role and another large FMCG player, I'm curious to get a little bit of insight into the secret sauce, if you will, behind how you crack that code, right? In terms of being able to take that global know-how and being able to combine it with that local knowledge to really be able to, you know, to do what you said, which is like do top down as well as ground up effectively.
Yeah, and if you've worked out the answer for Efrain, if you could just maybe we'll stay on after the call.
Yeah, well, I'll shoot you an email right after this.
Good, or maybe we'll do it over a coffee or a beer at some point. You never know.
Absolutely.
So I mean, look, my personal perspective on this is there is no one answer. There's a few things that you can do, I think, to give you a greater possible chance of success. I think the first one is thinking about, you know, where you spend your time and how you spend your time. I think the risk of being in a global role is that you spend a lot of your time with the most senior people in the organization, and you spend a lot of your time trying to sell or tell or inspire or drive. And actually, the way I think of it is I want to spend as much time with all levels of the organization across all functions and spend as much, if not more time listening than selling, inspiring, driving. So I think it's around how you spend your time is one of the things I think about. I think there's a mindset. I think there's a mindset as well around, you know, leaving your ego at the door to a certain extent, because actually I haven't got the right answer. I've got a few things I think might be good to do, but actually the right answer will come from getting the right people around the table all together. So I think there's a mindset. I think there is a mindset. And then I think the other thing is thinking about how you add value. So one of the questions I ask myself and my team, if anyone listens to this will laugh when they hear it, is whenever you finish a call with a market or region, you need to hold yourself true to have you done one of two things. Have you either made them think or act differently or taken work off them? And if you haven't done one of those two things, you haven't earned your money in that call. So hold yourself to account that you're adding value through every interaction you have.
Yeah, I love that. And I always remember I had a leader earlier in my career. He actually he challenged us to think about that before we would go into those meetings. He'd say, you need to think about what is it you want people to think, say, and do after this conversation. Okay. And like, you know, think about that before you go in. And then like you're saying, hold yourself accountable at the very end of that conversation. Did you accomplish those things?
Yeah, no, love it. I think that's certainly the mentality that we run by.
And there's this conversation about like digital and e-commerce going into other functions. I mean, I know that you have, apart from your core team, you also have a cross-functional team. So you interact with finance and supply chain. Probably you have some resources that are like business partnering with you guys. So reflecting on that part, how do you think that your team, through these ramifications that you have, how do you think you're driving change to the business as a whole?
So we very much run as a business unit, I would argue. So the way that we think about my role is that, I'm orchestrating and running the global digital commerce business for Mars Snacking. So I have the direct team that we talked about before, running customers, running capabilities, driving portfolio. But actually, I have dedicated cross-functional partners as well in supply chain, as you referenced, and that's actually a growing team where we're significantly investing this year. Finance, HR, and digital technologies, and those great associates are very much part of the digital commerce team as much as they are part of their core home function. And what's powerful about that is that we can truly think about enterprise change in the way that we work together and drive change. Great example for you. We have just developed a learning module that we've called Digital Commerce 101. There's been a few certificates that have been posted on LinkedIn recently. And we sat around the table and we said, this needs to go everywhere. So how can, for example, Dave, you as our finance partner, champion this through the finance organization? So Dave is then the flag flyer driving that change. And very much the way we think of it is that our role is to drive enterprise adoption, engagement, and curiosity behind digital commerce. But every fire needs a spark to start with, and we're the fire starters. So we need to light that fire and then drive it through. And that's one very small example, Daniel, but it's very much around making sure that we're thinking end to end. We're thinking horizontally as much as vertically in the work we do.
I love that phrase, driving enterprise adoption and curiosity, because I do think, like you said, sometimes we tend to think about our immediate functions and we don't think about the fact, like particularly in a role like you're in for DCOM, where it's got cross-functional relevance and quite frankly, interest as well. People are just wanting to personally learn about this. So, take that as an opportunity rather than a challenge and run with it.
Well, yeah, and let's be honest, we're all consumers and shoppers at the end of the day. So I can't imagine there's many people listening to this, or many of our teams who haven't done an Amazon order in the last day probably. So how can we think about bringing that curiosity and that way of learning that we have as a consumer, as a shopper, into our day jobs?
No doubt, no doubt. So you mentioned earlier on that you talked about when Daniel posed the question to you, how you saw digital commerce as a top of funnel, bottom of the funnel, and you rightfully said it's full funnel in terms of the proposition that it brings. I'm curious to get your perspective as to how you've seen that evolution take place or take hold over the last couple of years, and where do you see it possibly going next?
Yeah, fantastic area, sort of very rich, Efrain. We could go anywhere. I think where my head automatically goes to is, let's take retail media as an example, and the way that we operate there. So, if we go back a few years ago, retail media in an organization like Mars or many others was a bit of search, probably, particularly in the EU. It was very much around omni-channel, a bit of emerging Amazon, and that was, I'll do the quotey thing again here, retail media. If I think now about the way that we're building out our retail media capabilities, we're doing it hand in hand with our media team. So very much retail media is co-led within our organization between myself and my peer Rankin, who is our Chief Brand and Content Officer, because we sort of said, we can't win this battle just coming at it from a media perspective or from a digital commerce perspective. We need both. We need both equally. And the best example I've got to bring it to life is that we had a fantastic collaboration back in February where I took the whole of our global growth leadership team to meet with Uber in San Francisco. And it was probably for the first time that we all sat around the table and said, wow, what Uber are trying to do is actively activate across all stages of the consumer journey, every single one, not just try and sell stuff through Uber Eats. And if I'd have polled my peers going in, they'd have thought we were going to have a sell talking about Uber Eats and selling more on the Uber Eats platform. We walked out thinking about it really differently. So that's probably the best example I've got where they brought to life, how we can access these 2.5 billion trips a quarter, how we can engage with people in their everyday life. And it just set a really different strand.
Yeah, we actually spoke with the head of Uber advertising for the UK, Paul Wright, early this year. It's a great listen. And I have some good news for you guys, because you were pointing towards meeting up to have a beer, and will actually be able to do it very soon at Shoptalk here in my home turf in Barcelona. So
right, Daniel will be our host.
Exactly. Welcome to
Hey, Daniel. Thank you.
Welcome to Catalonia, the best country in Europe. Absolutely. Best time of the year to come as well, June, with the lovely weather, not warm and not too hot. So it will be a great occasion. But once we get into the feeder where it's happening, Neil, what are you excited about hearing, like in terms of tech, hot topics when we meet up at Shoptalk?
I mean, I'd start from the place of I genuinely, the Shop Talk weeks are some of the best weeks of my working year, to be honest. So I really enjoy the whole experience. I think of it very much as delivering across several fronts. The way that we think about it is, we get to engage with partners, we get to engage with peers, and we get to really think about sensing what are the new emerging trends and capabilities that we need to get behind as a team. So I spend probably a good half a day just walking the floor, and I love nothing more than walking the floor and speaking to various vendors, some of which might be existing, some of which might be new. So I guess the areas that I'm super curious about, we haven't talked about AI yet, and we've got to 36 minutes into the call and we haven't got there. This is a big hot topic for us, and how we can make sense of AI in the world of digital commerce is what's occupying a lot of my time and my team's time at the moment, both from a content perspective, but also how can we build out better efficiencies and better ways of working across all the jobs to be done across digital commerce, from inception all the way through to delivery. So AI and Gen AI specifically is a big focus. Data and analytics continues to be a big focus for us as an organization as well. We are, a huge organization with more data points than I could even number, and making sense of that in a structured and considered way. We've made great inroads in the last couple of years, but we've still got tons more to do. So thinking about having insights at our fingertips to drive everyday business decisions is another massive push. And the final one, Daniel, is around supply chain innovation as well. So, having been at a few of these events before, there are always, new supply chain operators who have new solutions and new capabilities, which I think challenge the way that we think about physically fulfilling those orders. My role is around, generate demand and create demand, generate demand, and fulfill demand. And we need to think about that final part of the equation as well.
Yeah,
absolutely. And like you said, I think, not only are we going to have the beautiful backdrop of Barcelona to enjoy, but I think Shoptalk always does a great job in terms of just being able to bring some of the top leaders on some of the topics that you mentioned here already. I wanted to ask, given that you mentioned earlier how important capability building is to the overall remit of your team, what do you see, and maybe this ties into some of the things that you mentioned as topics as Shoptalk, but how does this tie into some of the top capabilities you think an FMCG business like Mars, but I'm sure there's lots of others who are listening to this episode, that they should be investing in as well? Sorry.
Yeah, that's that could be a huge question, Efrain. So I guess the question in my mind is, where do we take it? If I think about us at a corporate level, I think the overall macro capabilities we're thinking about very much start with what's our purpose as an organization. And when we think about our purpose as an organization, we're talking about value creation, but thinking about it from multiple dimensions and from various different stakeholders' points of view. So of course, we need to think about financial and economic capital, but we need to think about human capital. We need to think about environmental capital. We need to think about social capital. So that probably takes you to some critical capabilities at the highest level around things like supply chain, and how can we sort of operate in a sustainable way, in a more sustainable way as an organization? How can we think about innovation through packaging, for example, and plastics? So, there's some macro capabilities which I think are critical to any CPG, but rooted in what clarity of purpose and clarity of vision and ambition. I think if I then take it down a level, I think the overall digitization of organizations end to end, we need capabilities in all of those spaces. So, let's think about digital from multiple dimensions, horizontally and vertically together. Every single function, what's the role of Gen AI, data analytics and digitization to enable them to do more work more quickly, more effectively and better work? So I'd think about it that way. And then if I bring it in a bit closer to home, the capabilities for us, I sit within the global growth leadership team, and our role is ultimately all enabling us to win with consumers. And that's what we get out of bed in the morning to do. There are several strands to that. The first one is around how do we build brands in a 21st century digitally enabled world, where if you double click again, you can get into, distracted consumers, digitally enabled consumers, consumers demanding personalization, and you start to go into an array of capabilities around content. You start to go into an array of capabilities around different media channels and the complexities of media channels, capabilities like DCO, for example. We could then go into what's the portfolio strategy. So how can we make sure we've got a living, breathing portfolio strategy? And then finally, what are the capabilities we're building to enable us to not only reach these consumers, but also engage and convert them? So how do we win in an omni-channel world through making sure we're closing purchase? Spend a lot of time with my team saying, we have a non-linear consumer journey. One of those stages is buying. We need every shopper, every consumer, or as many as possible to pass through buying, because last time I checked, until they do, there's not much money being made by anybody. So making sure that we're capturing that purchase.
That is music to my ears. I mean, I think just the last three things you said are like verbatim what I'm thinking about as well. So definitely we'll be picking your brain, hopefully a little bit more over that cocktail when we're together in June.
Exactly. And we talked before about like how you've driven your career, Neil, which has been like taking on sales roles, trade marketing, basically like the classical foundations into becoming a GM, which you became, and then you went over to doing strategic work and now e-commerce. So a very interesting turn. You've done a lot of interesting things. But the question I want to ask you is one that we ask all our guests, which is if you went back to your younger self, graduating from the University of Southampton, what would be that one piece of advice you would give yourself with everything that you've learned?
Well, one piece of advice would I give myself? So there's something in the way that you consider career moves, which has been probably a slightly later learning in life for me. So I think if I remember back, Neil, when he first graduated from university, it's very, very easy to think about career moves in a very linear fashion and in a very, vertical fashion, actually. And that sometimes leads you to the fact of you're getting quite deep expertise and probably some good scale learnings. But are you really getting the breadth, the perspective, and the diversity of experiences? So Neil of now would tell Neil graduating from the University of Southampton to think about experiences and to think about breadth and perspective over necessary scale, and probably ask myself three questions. And this is a question that I ask myself about every career move I make, and whenever anybody asks me for advice on, is this a good idea or not for me to take this move? Those three questions are: will it develop me? So will it give me new learnings? Will I be any good at it? And I think sometimes we're very quick to rush towards those things which are full-on development. But what are the skills, the capabilities that you're bringing, which will enable you to have a fast start? Because that will fuel your momentum, give you momentum and fuel your learning. And the final question is, will you enjoy it? So they're the three questions that I think about. Will it develop me? Will I be any good at it? And will I enjoy it? And the right answer is a blend of those three. And that's different for every different person, every different career choice they've got.
Excellent. A good blueprint, no, Efrain?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think hopefully we can all take away those three questions, and as we think about, where our career takes us.
And if we apply them to this call, then let's be honest, let's have a bit alive. So has this call developed me? Absolutely. So one of my personal objectives this year is to make sure that I'm building the external reputation of Mars Snacking and my skills to be able to do that. You can tell me later if I've been any good at this. I hope that I put my best foot forward and there'll be some learnings wherever it went. And I've very much enjoyed it. Perfect way to end the week.
We'll tell you when we hang up. But we need probably
no, better yet, Daniel. We will have the numbers to prove it, right? So I think we're all data guys, right? So we'll be able to look at the number of downloads and listens, and the proof is in the pudding.
Love it. So let's go over quickly, Neil. We'll go over with Efrain the key takeaways of the conversation. Now we'll make them summarize. I mean, there was so much here that we probably need another pod. We'd probably have to do the podcast about Neil Reynolds' conversation, but we will try to summarize them here. So where do you want to start? First of all, one of my key takeaways is that they have swag in Mars's digital team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think we'll be looking for it to be, worn loud and proud at Shop Talk, no doubt. I also really enjoyed just hearing about your the start of your career, Neil, as well. I love when you mentioned, that through your education in management sciences and accounting, and it developed that commercial curiosity in you that has carried throughout your entire career. So for me, as somebody who's also kind of spent some time in both commercial and marketing, it's just fascinating to see how you kind of took it all the way back to your university days and said that's kind of what sparked it for me. So for me, that I took that to heart as well, and it really resonated with me as well. I also really enjoyed hearing you talk about what it takes to succeed in a global role, and I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about one of the key elements of that is enterprise influence, and how do you do that well, and how do you do that effectively. And I think it is not the same skill that you would need to be able to be successful in a local or in a regional role. That's one of the things that when people think about, oh, I want to transition into a global role, they think about, the fact that it's got this broader reach across more markets and more countries. But, like to your point about, the three questions you asked at the very end, will I be good at it? One of the things you need to be good at is to be able to know how to drive influence at an enterprise level.
Yeah, and a lot of that is something very wise, but maybe we should remind ourselves more of, is leaving the ego at the door, no? Because there's gonna be like interest, there's gonna be struggles, and I think it's all about, and you said that as well, going there and rather than, you have to seduce and you have to convince, but your priority should be listening first, right? I think that was...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I love the, like you said, as important as it is to be able to tell and inspire, it's just as important to listen as well, and to be able to just take it in, right? And I think you said it really well as well, Neil, where you said, get the right people at the table to have that conversation together. And I think that the power that comes from those kinds of conversations is priceless when it comes to driving institutional transformation. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think this conversation has been like, for me, like very interesting. I was saying it before, like it reminded me that the business model of like a direct to consumer brand, but it's really like the proof that digital is really like embedding itself within the broader business, that it's no longer like just the key account, which kind of was before, but it's actually a key part of the business. It's integrated. We've talked about finance, HR, supply chain quite a lot as well. So it's just really interesting with this is going to, and I think this conversation, so we've talked a lot about digital, but this conversation for me has been like super interesting in that regard.
Yeah. And I'll just say one last thing, Daniel, that I took away from this, which is that I think when we talked about, what are we looking to learn at Shop Talk, and, AI took 38 minutes in our conversation to come up. But I think, that's actually is quite telling. It is that obviously it's everywhere. But I think the challenge for us as marketers is to say, how do I take AI or machine learning and actually use it to drive some sort of desired outcome in terms of either improved efficiency or effectiveness of what I'm already doing through my marketing or through my content as well. So I think that's something that a lot of us in marketing can take from that, and saying it's not just about saying I need to implement AI. It's like, well, how are you going to use it to get you to a better end result?
Yeah, and I think it's linking it to what Neil said towards the end, linking capabilities to what is the purpose of the organization, because ultimately technology has to serve the wider business and has to serve where the wider business is going to. So Neil, I hope we summarized this good enough.
Great summary, guys. Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been, as I said, you are my last call before the weekend. And for me personally, it's been a great way to spend my last hour. So no, thank you. I look forward to continuing the conversation in Barcelona. I think it's the first week of June, isn't it, for Shop Talk together?
3rd to 5th of June. So we will be also doing a couple of events in parallel. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll see you at Shop Talk. Thanks to everyone for tuning in.